وصلى الله تعالى وبارك وسلم على سيدنا محمد ختم الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت عليم حكيم، ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. فقد نوينا أتعلم وتعليم وتذكر وتذكير ونفع والانتفاع والإفادة والاستفادة والحث على التمسك بكتاب الله وسنة نبيه والدعاء إلى الهدى والدلالة على خير، وكل ما نواه مشايخنا ابتغاء وجه الله وثوابه وقربه. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما نافعا يا كريم. Alhamdulillah, in our Coffee and Connections sessions, we've been looking at Imam Haddad's work, Imam Abdullah bin Ali al-Haddad's knowledge and wisdom. And last week we discussed two very important qualities, the opposite of which is very detrimental to one's relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right, so those qualities were certainty and detachment. Right, so certainty, the opposite being obviously doubt. But detachment, the opposite of detachment, meaning detachment from worldly things, worldliness, is a love for worldliness. And love for worldliness and love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can never be together in the same heart. So they give the example that the heart is like a vessel. Right? If it's filled with the love of Allah, then there remains nothing of worldliness that is beloved to that person. But if it's filled with the love of the world, right, and we mean by the world just the material pleasures of the world that have nothing to do with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or have nothing to do with the soul or the next life, that if that's what fills the cup, or if that's what fills the heart, then the love of Allah is impossible until that is first removed. Right, so this metaphor has been given because the first process is to remove, right? To remove the bad qualities, to remove the blameworthy traits, to remove the love of worldliness, and automatically love of Allah will fill, right? Will fill in the heart. Right? So if you remove arrogance, automatically humility will take its place. If you remove ostentation, automatically sincerity for the sake of Allah will take its place, and so forth. Same thing with love of worldliness. Right? And just to reiterate, because today's topic also relates to the concept of dunya, that worldliness is everything that is devoid of any affiliation to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's completely devoid of an affiliation to Allah. Right? It doesn't mean things that are not religious. Everything that's not religious is worldly. So that means you have to sit in the masjid and do salat all day. No, that's not what it means. Right? That's not what it means. But there are certain things of this world that are bereft of any connection to the divine. Right? Amongst them is the haram. Anything that is haram is completely bereft of anything that will bring you closer to Allah. Right? And as they say that having a good intention in doing a haram action is like washing a pig with soap. Right? No matter how hard you scrub, it'll never become pure. Right? So anything that is haram automatically is devoid of the mercy of Allah. That is definitely considered dunya. Right? But there are also other aspects of dunya that are not haram per se, but they're distracting. They're extremely distracting, and they cause us to become heedless of Allah, heedless of our purpose in life, and heedless of that part of us that really makes us alive, which is our soul. Right? And many of these things end up are pleasures of the body, or in the other tradition they say pleasures of the flesh. Right? Now, pleasures of the flesh or pleasures of the body, or even pleasure in general, can be done for the sake of the soul, and it can be done for the sake of Allah, and one can do it as a worship to Allah if they have good intentions. If there's good intentions in it, and it's done in a moderate way that does not distract us from our purpose. Right? So if one wants to, for instance, relax, someone wants to watch the soccer game, or someone wants to take a walk through the park, are we saying, oh, that's dunya, astaghfirullah, you should be in the masjid? No. Not at all. Right? But what is your intention? Right? Are you doing it? Right? Are you keeping in mind right? Allah in your action. Right? Are you watching the soccer game? They say soccer or football here? Soccer. Are you watching the soccer game, right, just because? Or are you watching it so that you can relax, so you can clear your mind, so that you can refresh your energy, so you can go back to focusing on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Right? Are you watching it so that you can spend more time with your family who likes to watch soccer? Right? Are you keeping in mind these different aspects that may be pleasing to Allah even in those things? And at the same time, we do it in moderation. You're not going to sit and watch 8 hours of soccer marathon, right? And how many times can you watch the post-game and pre-game stats? Right? You could sum it up in 5 minutes, right? But why is the show 2 hours long? Right? Sometimes we have to cut down, right? But it doesn't mean that these things are worldly. But if it does end up becoming an 8-hour Call of Duty marathon with Cheeto dust on one shirt because they haven't moved in 20 minutes, in 5 hours, right? Is that worldly? Of course. We weren't created for that. We weren't created for abath, as Allah says, أَفَحَسِبْتُمْ أَنَّمَا خَلَقْنَاكُمْ عَبَثًا وَأَنَّكُمْ إِلَيْنَا لَا تُرْجَعُونَ. Do you think that we created you for no reason, right? For frivolous actions, right? And that you will not be returned to us, right? So there's a balance, and we find that the Prophet ﷺ, his entire life is perfect moderation. Right? Even his actual physical description is perfect symmetry and moderation, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Right? So we find that the Prophet ﷺ spent his nights standing in prayer, but we also find that he would spend time wrestling around and playing with his children. Right? We find that he was dealing with he was essentially the head of the government of Medina, right? So he had a lot of responsibilities. He was the leader of the army. He was the head of the city. He was, right, on top of that, right, encompassing all of that, he's the messenger of Allah. But as well, he's a father. He's a neighbor. So he's a parent, a grandparent, and so forth, right? But we find balance in his life, that he had time for Allah. Right? He had specific times of worship. He had times where he went to other people's house and had food. He had times when he invited people to his house to have food. There are times where he went to just check on people. How are they doing? There are times where he would just sit in a masjid and talk to people. Right? They said that if we were talking, the Prophet would come and talk to us. If we were talking about secular things or worldly things, he would talk to us about worldly things. Right? But what was his intention? Right? And he would always give them more things to think about and more knowledge. If they were to talk about food, he would talk about food, but he would talk about the benefits of food. Right? How does this food help you in this way? How does it help you in this way? And this does this, and this does this. Right? And if we talked about akhirah, he would teach them things that they didn't know. Right? So we have that balance, but at any point in that was he ever distracted from Allah, or was he ever distracted from his purpose, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And what he did do, he always had specific time just for Allah. Right? And that is one of the biggest cures for a person who is distracted, or a person who feels that they may be heedless sometimes, or may have long periods of time where they don't think about Allah, or they may be caught up in these kind of frivolous pastimes. That one of the ways that they can slowly bring themselves to a moderate amount, or to remove it altogether, is to have some portion of time during the day to be alone with Allah. Some portion of time every single day, even if it's 5 minutes, even if it's a few 10 minutes after the Fajr prayer, or 5 minutes before the Fajr prayer, even better. Right? Just to be alone with Allah. As Ibn Ata'illah as-Sakandari, he says, what a great thing is a moment of seclusion that you enter by means of it into the fields of reflection. A moment of seclusion. Right? Because if a person can do that sincerely, then what will happen is that they start to experience something called uns. Uns is is a spiritual comforting, that they become comfortable in being alone with Allah, that they start to enjoy it, and they actually feel, right, if a person really isn't, if this state really overcomes them, then they'll be alienated amongst humans, right, and would rather be alone with Allah, right, and that's a high level, and we'll see that coming up, inshallah ta'ala, right. But to feel alienated just for sitting in a moment alone with Allah, that's a problem, right? To not be able to sit just for a few minutes and think of and reflect about Allah and remember Allah and make dua to Allah and speak to Allah, right? That's a problem. As they say, al-unsu bin nas dalilul iflas. To only feel comfort when you're amongst created beings or people, right, is the sign of spiritual poverty, of bankruptcy, spiritual bankruptcy. That you're only comfortable when you have so-and-so friend with you, or you have so-and-so, right, technology with you. And we see this after the prayer, that when we finish the prayer, immediately we reach for our phone, because we can't be comfortable alone. Right? So that's something we really have to work on, right? Because what we want to do is at least designate 5 minutes a day. 5 minutes a day. Right? And that 5 minutes, right, after a while, it may be difficult in the beginning because of the nafs, and the nafs is not used to it. Right? But once a person strives to do it, Allah will make it the sweetest thing that they've ever experienced. Right? Until, right, in the beginning, it's how much time is left. Right? You're sitting there, okay, okay, a few more minutes, right? And then in the end, it's like, okay, it's 20 minutes, right? Time's up, right? Your wife calls you, or your husband calls you, or, right, time's up, and you're like, just a few more minutes. I'll be there soon, right? And that's what happens when someone tastes the reality of a relationship with the Creator, right, and is freed from the bondage of only being trapped in relationships with creation, right? Completely only with the creation. Right, so today he kind of extends that understanding, that, right, that detachment from worldly things, right? And he tells us that about the shortness of this life, right? And this is one of the main focal points of being able to detach from worldly things, to remove from the heart love of just random material possessions that have no specific intrinsic value, that have no value with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? As the Prophet told us in many a hadith, right, that had worldliness or had material things been worth the weight of a mosquito in the sight of Allah, He would not have given anyone who rejects Him a drink of water. He would not have given anyone who rejects His existence a drink of water. Right? But there's many people who reject Allah, but they have castles, they have mansions, they have palaces, they have yachts, they have money, they have, right, $1 billion net worth bank accounts. Right? That means it's not even worth the wing of a mosquito. It means nothing to Allah. Material possessions mean nothing to Allah. Right? What your intention is in using them, why did you get it? Right? Did you do it for Allah? Are you spending it for Allah? Are you using it for Allah? Right? That matters to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So one of the biggest ways to focus the heart on, or to be able to detach the heart from those worldly things, is to think about the shortness of this life. Right? And this directly correlates with the remembrance of death. And we recently did the whole section of the Ihya Ulumuddin, the revival of religious sciences, the chapter of remembrance of death in the Thursday night revival circle. And it's an extremely important thing to remember death. Right? And if you notice that that people who are extremely worldly, extremely materialistic, extremely secular, they shy away from any discussions of death. because it's automatic, even if without even reflecting, it's automatic that death equals the end of all of what I have. All of my efforts go to zero at death. And it's knowledge, it's certainty. There's no doubt that that's going to happen. Everyone knows that they're going to die, and those $1 million, those yachts, those castles, those mansions, they will not come to the grave with the person. They will not enter in the grave. And this is why, like you see, and this is a time-old, ancient understanding. Death has always been there since the beginning. And if you know anything about the Egyptian history, like pre-Islamic Egyptian history, that they used to mummify their kings and these things, right? So the kings, what they would do is they would have all their wealth brought to them in their tomb, because their belief was that they would have benefit from it in the next life. Wrong. Right? It's gone. Right? So if a person's only desires, their only aspirations, their only objective in this world are material things, it ends at death. Death is the worst possible thing for them to think about. Right? Whereas a person only lives in this life as a traveler, that they know that this life is just preparation for the real life, the next life. Right? That they live in this life for the sake of Allah. They will never lose Allah. If they have Allah, right, death only brings them one step closer to Allah, right, to the meeting of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the akhirah, and seeing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right, so Imam Ghazali, he mentions there that for the worldly person, there's two pains at death, that they experience two types of pain at death. One is the actual pain of the soul being removed from the body, right? And second is that they are leaving that which they loved. There's that separation. Whereas the true believer experiences two joys at death, that the soul is taken out lightly, and the death is only bringing them closer to what they love. And he brings a whole section of examples of how some of the Sahaba died, what was their last state before they died, and some of the righteous as well. And then himself, his story is beautiful. That's Bilal ibn Abi Rabah, the mu'adhin of the Prophet ﷺ, alayhi ridwanullahi ta'ala, when he was passing away, and he died in Syria because he couldn't stay in Medina anymore. Every corner he turned, it reminded him of the Messenger of Allah, and he would just cry, so he had to leave. Right, so as he's passing away, his wife says, wa karaba, what a calamity. Right, she's sad at his death, and he says, no, don't say that. He said, wa taraba, what a joy, what a great day it is for me. غَدًا أَلْقَى مُحَمَّدًا وَحِزْبًا. Tomorrow I will see Muhammad and his friends and his companions. Right, so he's going toward that which he loves. We see that Imam al-Ghazali alayhi rahmatullah himself, when he was passing away, he prayed 2 rakats, and then he sat down, he laid down on his right side facing the Qibla, right, as if he already knew what was going to happen. And then he said, "Ajiltu ilayka Rabbi li tarda." Right, I am hastening to you, O my Lord, so that you are pleased. And then he died. Right. So these are what's called the husnul khatima, the beautiful endings. Right. So he brings a lot of poetry, right, in this chapter. Right, and he discusses that, right, the world is but a moment. If you compare, how long do people normally live in Canada? What is it? 80 years. Okay. What is 80 years in compared to infinity? It's not even a mathematical equation. No calculator could count that many zeros, right? Even if at the far distant end there may be a 1 after, right? It's no comparison whatsoever. Right, so he says that the world is but a moment. The world is just a moment. Right. So if you look, if you try this, if you look to your past, say, think 20 years ago. Right? Think about 20 years ago or 10 years ago. It feels like yesterday. Right? But the problem is, 10 years from now seems like a long time. Right? So if we think toward the future, right, we think that, oh, we have a long time to live. Right? Especially if we're considering the 80 years. Right? Right? And that's problematic because really it's not a lot of time. It's not a lot of time. Right? And if you think about, right, if you think about all the things that you would have done differently if you could go back 10 years, right, you would notice that a lot of the time was wasted. Right? We had a lot of chances to do, right? And we're not where we want to be right now because we did not use the time properly before. Right? And not get our goals. Right? So he gives the first a few poems, right? And then so he says, rahimahullah ta'ala, wa nafa'ana bihi. He starts with the poem of Imam Shafi'i, alayhi rahmatullahi ta'ala, who said, "The world is but a moment, so make it," meaning make every moment an obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? And this concept should not be strange, right? That every single moment, you can draw nearer to Allah at every moment, no matter what it is you're doing. Even if you're commuting to work, even if you're cooking dinner, even if you're sitting with your friends, right? Every moment can be a means to draw nearer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? It can be used to draw nearer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He brings the next poem, زِيَادَةُ الْمَرْءِ فِي دُنْيَاهُ نُقْصَانُ وَرِبْحُهُ فِي غَيْرِ مَحْدِ الْخَيْرِ خُسْرَانُ. That increase in worldly things is to a person but diminishment, right? That there's a loss, right? And his profits in other than sheer goodness are but loss. Right? Right, so increasing in worldly things, right, leads to no benefit in this life or the next. Right? But increasing in good deeds is eternal. Right? And this is why Allah calls the good deeds al-baqiyatu as-salihat, the everlasting good deeds. Because if you say subhanallah one time, let's all do it. Right? Ready? Subhanallah. One time. You will benefit from that subhanallah for infinity. It'll never end. It'll be eternal, right? But if you say you go to the buffet, a sushi buffet, right, and you get your money's worth, right? I remember I used to take a friend of mine. He wasn't Muslim yet, but he really loved sushi. So we would go, and you used to have this little card that you put how much you want of each, right? And they thought we were lying. the amount of sushi we requested. They ended up giving us half what we ordered, right? Because they didn't believe we could finish it, right? After that, do you still benefit from it when you walk out? You're quite sick, actually. It's too much mercury. Right? It ends. It's gone. Right? It's finished. Right, so, and that's how dunya is. That even like the pleasures of the body, right? Oh, I have to do this, or I have to do this, or someone really has the desire for something, and they do it, then it's over, and then I want to do more. Right? The next desire is even stronger than the first, right? And it's never ending. It's just enslavement that never ends. Right? He says, إِذَا كَمْ تَمَادٍ فِي غُرُورٍ وَغَفْلَةٍ وَكَمْ هَكَذَا نَوْمٌ إِلَى غَيْرِ يَقْظَةٍ. Till when will you dwell in illusion and distraction? How long will you sleep and not wake up? أَتُنْفِقُ هَذَا فِي هَوَى هَذِهِ الَّتِي أَبَى اللَّهُ أَن تَسْوَى جَنَاحَ بَعُوضَةٍ. Will you spend all this in the love of that which God set lower than the wing of a mosquito, a gnat, he says. وَلَوْ نِلْتَ مِنْهَا مَالِ قَارُونَ لَمْ تَنَلْ سِوَى لُقْمَةٍ فِي فِيكَ مِنْهَا وَخِرْقَةٍ. If Qarun's fortune, we all know the story of Qarun, right, in the Quran, And Qarun, inna Qarun kana min qawmi Musa fabagha alayhim, that he was a person from the people of Musa alayhi salam, but he was extremely unjust. Right? وَآتَيْنَاهُ مَا إِنَّ مَفَاتِحَهُ لَتَنُوءُ بِالْعُصْبَةِ وَالْعُقُوبَةِ وَآتَيْنَاهُ مِنَ الْكُنُوزِ, and we gave him of such treasures that its keys would take a large group of strong people to carry, just the keys of the treasures. Right, so he had all the worldly things. He had all the money, all the power, all the right, and part of worldliness is status, right? Status, not status with Allah, because there's people who are poor and have no status according to worldly terms, but they're the most beloved people to Allah. And there's people who are the richest people in the world, and Allah does not care about them whatsoever. Right? As Allah. Right, the Prophet said that on the Day of Judgment, a person will come who is obese, right? Because they enjoyed so much of the dunya, right? But they don't weigh even an atom's weight on the Day of Judgment, because weight is according to value on the Day of Judgment. Right, and then he says, if Qarun's fortune from it should you obtain, it would still be but a morsel in your mouth and a cloth. That's it. Right, and all of it goes back to two things. Right, Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib, right, he said, "Man kanat himmatuhu ma yadkhulu batnahu, kanat qimatuhu ma yakhruju minha." Right, whoever's only concern is what enters their stomach, their only value is what comes out of it. Whoever their only concern is what enters their stomach, their only value is what comes forth from it. Right. And really, all of the pleasures of the world, right, he says here, right, siwa luqmatin fi fika minha wa khiniqati. All it is just some food that you put in your mouth and some cloth on your skin. That's it. Right. Is there anything else? If you summed it all up, all it is as Imam Haddad, he says in his poetry, يا ويح نفس غوية عن السبيل السوية أضحت تروج علي وقصدها الجاه والمال, that وحشوها آفات وأشغال, that the dunya is filled with calamities, right, and preoccupations, right, things that busy you. Right, so he brings a lot of poetry, and the chapter is very short, so we kind of wanted to take this and the next chapter at the same time, which only leaves us 2 chapters till we finish the book. Right, so he starts with that the dunya it's very short. It's very short. And he bridges from that into the next part, which is structuring our time. Right, so there's 2 things. One, that we don't have a lot of time. Right, and having this idea that I'm going to live really long, right, that's delusion. It's delusion. Right? And it's one of the sicknesses of the heart, which is tulul amal, long hopes. And the Prophet ﷺ, he said in the hadith of Abu Dawood, I believe, he says, rahimahullah ta'ala, Ali ibn Abi Talib, he said that إِنَّمَا أَخْشَى عَلَيْكُمْ اتِّبَاعَ الْهَوَى وَطُولَ الْأَمَلِ. The things that I really fear for you are your following your caprice, your desires, and long hopes. This idea of living extremely long, that I'm going to live until I'm 80, right? Or I'm going to live forever. He says, because following your desires prevents you from the truth, and it keeps the worldliness present in your heart. Whereas long hopes makes you forget about the akhirah. Right? Part of that is death, forgetting about death. And he says that the dunya is leaving you, and the akhirah is coming towards you. And for each of them has their people. So be of the people of the akhirah, and do not be of the people of the dunya. Because today there is action, but no reckoning. You can do today. You can make tawbah. You can make up for all the mistakes in 2 rakats. Right? With 1 tear from your eye. You can make up all of it right now. So there's action, you have the chance to act today, and there's no reckoning. But tomorrow there's reckoning with no action. There's nothing you can do after that. Right? So he tells us about structuring our time. Right? And he actually quotes directly from Imam Ghazali in the beginning of Guidance. And anyone who really wants to structure their time in a fruitful and beneficial way, keeping in mind their responsibilities to their family and to their job and to their school, right? But also not wasting, not allowing oneself to waste their time. The book of the beginning of Guidance by Imam Ghazali is a beautiful book. Right? It's well translated as well. He goes through the schedule from waking up till going back to sleep. If you do have it in the revival of religious sciences, he does the same thing, but for all different types of people. Right? So if you're a seeker of knowledge, if you're studying, right, then this is your schedule. If you're a scholar and you're teaching, then this is your schedule. If you're a worker, a businessman, right, this is your schedule. If you're a farmer, then this is your schedule. He goes through each one of them. It's a beautiful chapter, right? And and then part of the schedule is scheduling times for relaxation, scheduling a break, scheduling time, right, to relax the mind, right? But obviously trying to choose something that's beneficial and active, an active pastime, right? Instead of a passive pastime like screen time and television. All these things are passive. There are no benefits, right? With rare exceptions, right? So he he guides us to the beginning of Guidance, and he says that he says, "You should not neglect your time or use it haphazardly. Right? On contrary, you should bring yourself to account, structure your religious actions, your spiritual routines, and other practices during each day and night, and assign each period a fixed and specific function." Right? And then he tells us what do we get for doing that. He says, this is how to bring about the blessing of each period. Each time has its own blessing. Right? And we know that time is a blessing itself. The fact that we still have time to make tawbah, that we still have time to rectify our situation, we still have time to change our direction in life. Right? That time is a blessing, and Allah says that if you are grateful for the blessing, then I will increase you. Right? And gratitude for the time is using it in that which is most important. Right? Many people, as our teacher mentioned, many people say they're busy, but very few people are busy in that which is most important. Right? That which is most important. And that applies to worldly and religious things. Right? Time of salah comes in, most important is salah. Right? If your mother wants you to come to her house and help her with something, most important thing is your mother, right? Not your friend, not this or not that, right? So things have priorities, right? So then the blessing of each time comes into it, right? And many of the righteous, because they use their time so perfectly for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not wasting even a moment, not even a breath, right? Allah gave them blessings in time. Right? Habib Muhammad bin Salam bin Hafiz, the father of Habib Umar, Habib Umar said that when he was young, he went with his father to some of the gatherings. He would go for teaching, he would give lectures and classes. And they went after Fajr, after the Ishraq, and before Dhuhr they came back. And in between they did 11 full gatherings. 11 full gatherings. That's blessing in time. Right? There are many people who would do, like for instance, many of the scholars of Islam, if you were to calculate of all the books that they authored in their very short life, right, they would have to have written 25 or what was it? Like over 50 pages a day from birth till death. That's like, if you were to calculate how much they would have to have written in order to do all that. But Allah blesses them in time. Allah gives them blessing in time. Right, so Imam Haddad, he says that you have to fill your time with your acts of worship so that not a single moment, day or night, passes uselessly. right? And by that, the blessing of time will manifest, and you will benefit from your life, and you will constantly be drawing nearer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he says, and it's also important that you put, for all of the things that your responsibilities or your customs, right? He says adats, like eating, he says eating, drinking, working, right? Earning a livelihood, also schedule those, right? Schedule times for those, so that now you're always in benefit. You're always going from, right, direct worship of Allah, which is like prayer and recitation of Quran and reflection and so forth, and indirect worship of Allah, which is going to work with intentions, right, which is worship, right? Eating with intentions, eating according to the Sunnah, sleeping with intentions, right? And Imam Ghazali, he says that if you have to, then sleep 8 hours a day maximum, right? And it should suffice enough to say that that's 1/3 of your life if you live to 60. That's 1/3 of your entire life, right? But if you sleep with intentions, you sleep the way of the Prophet ﷺ, with the Sunnah of the Prophet, right? Sleep with wudu, face the Qibla, right? All of these blessed things that the Prophet would do, that's 1/3 of your life as pure worship to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's not like you're missing out by doing other things. La ilaha illallah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Right, so the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, actually before we jump into that, I wanted to ask, what is hardest about making a schedule and sticking to it? Why is it that we do this but we break our schedules? What do you think is the underlying reason? Anyone want to share? Anyone? Should I just point at somebody? Anyone here ever tried to make a schedule? Okay, we have one. Anyone else? Two? No one else made a schedule? Entire life? Okay, that's...
Sometimes you have people that are not aware of your schedule, and they have rights over you, and they ask you for help, so you don't end up completing a task because you don't go help them. Like, there's unpredicted things in your schedule.
That's a good point, right? Unpredicted things mess up the schedules, right? But that unpredicted thing happens on one day. How come the next day we don't just go back to schedule? Right? It ends up being like one thing comes and then boom, schedule's completely gone. Like, why does it go to that extreme? Sidi Omar?
One is feels like the variables change, and the other is procrastination.
Okay, so variables change. That's similar to what Sister mentioned. And procrastination. Ooh, now we're getting to the root of it. Right, procrastination. Right, another huge obstacle which we really, really need to combat is laziness. Right, laziness it's a waste of life. Right, and this is why, right, and most of us a lot of us in this time are raised with passive entertainment, right, passive, I think, and these kind of build up within one a laziness. We used to play, when I was very young, we used to play marathons of video games, like marathons. And all it does, it just, right, it makes you into a zombie after a while. Right? Same thing with television. Right? You sit there for hours watching whatever, right, one after another. Afterwards, you don't want to do anything but watch another one. You don't do anything. Right? It builds laziness. Right, so laziness and procrastination are big problems. Right, big problems. Right, and these are things that require discipline. Right? Discipline is really important in spirituality because it's all based on discipline, really. Right? Doing a certain routine every single day at the same exact time with presence of heart. right? Praying the prayers on time, being at the right place at the right time, right? And doing everything with beauty and perfection. Even like schooling, right? Being there on time, doing the work on time, right? Right? Studying when you're supposed to be studying and not doing other things. Right? Our teachers used to tell us in this, when we were studying, that when it's time to study, don't play. But when it's time to play, don't study. Right? Don't study, because students, they switch everything. It's class time, they're playing, right? And then when they're supposed to be playing, they're studying, so then the cycle just continues. Right? So, and this is why, like, even if one is going to have entertainment time or relaxed time, schedule it. Have a time for that. Right? Because if we don't, then we're going to be overburdened by, right, these acts of worship, which are really heavy sometimes. They can be really heavy. Reading Quran for a long period of time is not easy. Right? We start small, right, and we're realistic. Right? I can't do that much work. Okay, right, 1 hour of break to do whatever I want to do. Right? 3 times a day, if necessary. Right? So we have to do that. Why else do you think, though, that we don't go back to our schedule when we break it? Because things happen, right? Someone calls, someone gets sick, especially people have kids, people have jobs or schooling, right? You have a group project or your finals are coming up, right? Things change, right? But why can't we go back to our schedules afterwards?
Maybe we try to take on more than what we can handle. It's easier to stay off of that fixed schedule.
Yeah.
Going back to the old habits is easier.
Yeah. Sometimes we take on more than we can handle. I think many of us do that. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because it's a sign of sincerity. Right? And when people realize that they have not been capitalizing on their time and using it properly for their next life, they tend to try to make up for all of that at once. They make qada of all the time I've wasted. So instead of, right, taking on a moderate amount of each thing and slowly, gradually trying to progress, like, okay, I've been wasting the past 20 years of my life, so let me read the whole Quran in one day, fast the next this whole month, right? It's voluntary fast, and I'm going to wake up 3 hours before Fajr. Right? I've seen it. I've seen people, right, jump from one extreme to another, and that's what shaitan wants. Right? And the nafs, that base desire of the human, loves any extreme. Every extreme is beloved to the nafs. Right? Even if it's either extreme laxity, I'm not doing nothing. Right? I'm not going to read any Quran, I'm not going to do this or that. Right? Or extreme, I'm going to read the whole Quran. Both of those are beloved to the nafs, because they both end in the same place. Right? Burning out. Right? Or wasting time. And shaitan wants that as well. If he can't get you to stop doing it, he's going to get you to do too much, so you stop doing it. Now, there's a few things that he mentions as tips to kind of, if something happens. Now, even the Prophet ﷺ already taught us that if variables happen or unexpected things happen, that this is what you do, right? Or this is what you should realize. He mentioned ﷺ that من كان مقيما أو مسافرا كتب له ما كان يعمل مقيما صحيحا. مريضا أو مسافرا. Whoever is sick or traveling, then they get the same reward of what they used to do when they were residents and healthy. Right? So Allah takes into mind, right? Allah takes into account, right, valid excuses. Right? Sometimes we make excuses for ourselves. Right? But if you're actually sick or you're really actually busy, right, then these things have their place. Right? But the Prophet ﷺ, in his own practice, that Sayyidah Aisha, she said that if he would be busied away from something that he would normally do, some spiritual routine of his, then he would do it the next morning before Zawal, or before the Dhuhr time. And if you do that, it's counted as if you did it the night before. So you're on schedule. You're considered on schedule. Another aspect is that if we make a schedule, right, we have to have the resolve to stick to it. The first thing shaitan is going to attack is that resolve. Right? And part of that resolve, and this is kind of why we don't go back to the schedule once it's broken, right, is because, right, shaitan is attacking that resolve. So we have resolve, everything's going good, we're on schedule, day 1, day 2, day 3, something happens, day 4, right, we broke our schedule. Right? The resolve would dictate that you make up what you didn't do yesterday. It might be hard. You might have to do twice as much Quran today, twice as much, right? Unless it was a real excuse like sickness, or, right? If you can, to repeat it, to make it up, right? And that will just put shaitan to bed, right? Because, right, he will stop encouraging you, right, to break your schedule, because he knows you're just going to do extra worship the next day. Right? He'll give up. Right? But if he can get you to be despondent, right? Oh, I missed it yesterday, right? And there's no consequence whatsoever. There was no makeup, there was no tawbah, there was no anything. Right? Then what's stopping me from missing it today? There's no consequences. But if I know that whatever I don't do today, I'm going to make qada of it tomorrow, I'm going to make it up tomorrow, right? Then he won't bother with that, because you already have that resolve. And shaitan cannot attack anyone with resolve. If you have a firm resolve to do something, he can't mess with you. Right? One of the early Muslims said that al-himma, true aspiration, right, is, he said, in some ways, like Ismullah al-A'zam. It's like the greatest name of Allah, that if you call upon Allah with it, your dua is accepted. So aspiration is like that those who really want something, they get it. That's the sunnah of Allah in this world, that those who really want it, they generally achieve. So those who really wants, right, the relationship with Allah, they'll achieve this discipline, right? The fact, and they will make up for what they missed out. They will redo what they have to do, and they will make tawbah when they need to. And shaitan can't mess with that type of person. They cannot. He can't mess with yaqeen. We wanted to just share something. 2 things actually. One is the poem of Imam Haddad, just a part of it, which is a very famous poem. And he talks about a few different qualities. One is being content with the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The other is being patient, right, and grateful. But then he talks about the dunya. Right? And he says, وَذِهْ دُنْيَا دَنِيَّةً حَوَادِثَهَا كَثِيرًا وَعِيشَتَهَا حَقِيرًا وَمُدَّتَهَا قَصِيرًا. And this world, right, this worldly life, right, as the Prophet said, that the dunya is distance from the mercy of Allah, and everything in it is also distance from the mercy of Allah, except for the remembrance of Allah and that which is near to it, right? Or the person who teaches knowledge, or the one who seeks knowledge. Right? So he says that this dunya is lowly. Right? Its occurrences, meaning that its tribulations are many. Its tribulations are many. Its life, right, the life of the dunya is, right, worthless, right? And its length is very short. وَلَا يَحْرِسْ عَلَيْهَا سِوَى أَعْمَى الْبَصِيرَةِ. Only the one who is blinded inwardly, right, would be, right, completely covetous of it. عَدِيمِ الْعَقْلِ, who has no intellect. لَوْ كَانَ يَعْقِلْ كَانَ أَفْكَرْ. If they were to think deeply, they would have understood better. Right? Just think about it. No matter any worldly pursuit whatsoever, a worldly pursuit, meaning completely worldly, not that you want to get a degree so that you can have a good job and have halal means and take care of your family, that's not worldly at all, right? But completely worldly goals, completely worldly possessions, right? All you have to do is say somebody like that came to you and said, you know what, I want to do this, I want to do this, I want to do this, I want to get this kind of car, and I want to get this kind of, right, absurdly huge house with this kind of shaped pool or something, right? And all you have to do is just say, and then you die. That's it. right? Their smile just drips away from the face, and then you die. But go to one of the awliya of Allah. Right? Go to someone who, right, I want to memorize the Quran, I want to learn Arabic, I want to learn my deen, I want to purify my soul, I want to go visit the righteous cities of the world that are still remaining, I want to go see the pious, right? And then you say to them, then you die, their smile gets bigger, right? Because then you'll see Allah, right? All that was leading up to the climax, right? So he says that really the one whose only goal is dunya, it's complete ignorance. It's foolishness. So he says that think about its fleetingness, that it'll end soon, and that its extreme amount of burdens. Dunya is tiring. Dunya is tiring. Right? You get hungry, you get tired, you get sick, you have worries, stress, grief. All that is alien to the akhirah, right? For the one who's prepared for it. Right? وَفِي قِلَّةِ غِنَاهَا, and it's never enough. So he says, so glad tidings to the one who was wary of it, right? And divorced it and prepared themselves in the obedience of the most merciful. Right? We just wanted to mention that, right, to preclude Muawiyah ibn Abu Sufyan radiallahu anhu. He was asked to describe Ali. This is after Ali, I believe Ali he went elsewhere while Muawiyah was in the west, right? He was first in Medina and then moved to another city, right? So they asked him, describe to me Ali, right? And at first he didn't want to, but he said that if I must describe Ali, and we'll stop with this, right? If I must describe Ali, I would say that he was ba'id al-madad. He had far-sightedness. He was looking far into the future. Shadid al-quwa. He was very strong. يقول فصلا ويحكم عدلا. He would speak eloquently and to the point, and he would judge justly. يتفجر العلم من جوانبه. Knowledge poured out from his sides. وتنطق الحكمة من نواحيه. And wisdom was spoken from all from him. He felt alienated from worldly things and its adornments, right? But he was comforted by the night and its darkness, meaning the tahajjud prayer, standing in front of Allah at night. That was his comfort. وَكَانَ وَاللَّهِ غَزِيرَةَ الْعَبْرَةِ. He was, I swear by Allah, constantly crying. طَوِيلَ الْفِكْرَةِ. Deeply and for long periods of time in reflection. يُقَلِّبُ كَفَّهِ. He would turn his hands, right? And this is an expression Arabs would do when they were pondering over something really deep, right? وَيُخَاطِبُ نَفْسَهُ. And he would address himself. يُعْجِبُهُ مِنَ اللِّبَاسِ مَا قَصُرَ. He only liked of clothing that which was short, just long enough, right? Because pride was, they would wear really long garments, the Arabs, out of pride. Right? So he would take that which is just enough for the necessity. وَمِنَ الطَّعَامَ جَشَبْ. And he liked of food that which was just enough to fill, just enough to remove hunger. كَانَ وَاللَّهِ كَأَحَدِنَا. He was like one of us. He would bring us close and he would give us things and he would answer our questions when we would ask. And along with his bringing us closer and his closeness with us, we would not speak to him out of awe of him. But if he smiled, then he would smile as if it was a series of pearls. And this is similar to to the Prophet ﷺ. يُعَظِّمُ أَهْلَ الدِّينِ. He would really respect religious people who are focused on Allah. He would respect them greatly. وَيُحِبُّ الْمَسَاكِنِ. He loved the poor people. وَلَا يَطْعَمُ الْقَوِيُّ فِي بَاطِلِ. Right? No strong person would ever have any hope that he would judge falsely. Right? وَلَا يَيْأَسُ الضَّعِيفُ مِنْ عَدْلِهِ. Nor any weak person would lose hope in his justice. So I testify by Allah that I have seen him one night, and the night has cast its veil, meaning that it became really dark. وَغَارَتْ نُجُومُهُ, and the stars came out. Right? And I saw him yamidu fi mihrabi, leaning in his mihrab. And each of the houses, they would have a place of prayer. They would have like a little cutouts. Like some message you'll see on the qibla wall, there's a mihrab like this. Right? So he's leaning into his mihrab, holding onto his beard. يَتَمَلْمَلُ, and he was, right, يَبْكِي بُكَاءَ الْحَزِينَ, and he was crying like the person who is extremely sad. Right? And the narrator, Muawiyah, he's saying, it's as if I can hear him right now saying, oh my Lord, and being devoted to right, in dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then he would say to the dunya, he would address the dunya, he would speak to the dunya. إِلَيَّ تَغَرَّرَتْ, to me you're trying to deceive. Right? إِلَيَّ تَشَوَّفَتْ, to me you're trying to seduce me. Hereafter, right? Never, غُرِّي غَيْرِي, deceive someone else, not me. Deceive someone else. قَدْ بَتَتْتُكَ ثَلَاثًا, I have divorced you 3 times. Right? We know what that means in Islam. فَعُمْرُكَ قَصِيرٌ, عُمْرُكِ قَصِيرٌ, right? Your time period is short. وَمَجْلِسُكِ حَقِيرٌ, and gatherings for your sake are worthless. وَخَطُرُكَ يَسِيرٌ, right? And your consequence is paltry. آهن من قلة الزاد وبعد السفر ووحشة الطريق. Right? Woe to me from a lack of provision and a very long journey and an alienating path, meaning the journey to the akhirah is long. Right? And all we have for that is what we provide for ourselves in this life, what we prepare for our journey in this life. Right? So he says, فَوَقَفَتْ دُمُوعُ مُعَاوِيَةٍ. And it's important to know the narrator themselves, that Muawiyah is an amazing person himself, the son of Abu Sufyan. Right? So he says that the tears of Muawiyah started to pour down onto his beard, and he was not able to stop it. And he's describing this. So he started to dry him off with his sleeve, and he was and everyone was choking in tears. And he said that was how Abu Hassan was, rahimahullah ta'ala. Right? And that is how Abu Hassan was. Right? And that is how Ali lived his entire life. He loved Allah, he loved the akhirah, he loved the Prophet, he loved any good deed that would bring him to Allah. Any chance to do a good deed, he would do it. He used to search for the hottest days of the year to fast. Right? And we're not saying that anyone should do that, right? But that just shows, don't think that he forced himself to do that. He longed for that. Right? He longed for that more than thirsty people long for cold water. He sought that out because he knew Allah loved it, and he did it because Allah loved it, and he loved it because of that. Right? He chose poverty. He had the opportunity to be rich many times. He chose poverty. He didn't want it. He was asked about the dunya. He said, should I tell you in length, or should I tell you the short version? They said short version. He said, whatever is halal of it, you will be asked about on the Day of Judgment. And whatever is haram, you'll be punished. Leave it. Right? So, and there's levels of leaving the dunya. They chose to leave it entirely. They chose poverty. They chose only to beg from Allah. The Prophet chose to be hungry one day and fed the next. Hungry one day and fed the next. So he can be grateful and patient. They chose that. But Allah is not asking that of us. Right? Allah is asking us to leave the haram. Leave the haram of the dunya and remove those things of dunya that are distracting us completely from our purpose in life and from Allah. Remove them slowly. It may not be something we should do all in one day. We're not saying to go home and just throw everything like in the trash. Right? But we have to limit it and really use our time for the best of this world and the next, seeking the pleasure of Allah. Right? So it's a really intense chapter, right? And these are things that kind of make us as believers go against the grain. Like if you were to go to your college or to your high school or to your right, or to your workplace, and even mention something of voluntary poverty and, right, abandoning material things, people will look at you like you have 3 heads. Right? Most people don't understand that paradigm, right? Because we are raised in a place that's going the complete opposite direction. Right? Everything around us, advertisements, everything is calling us to right, toward worldliness. Everything is calling us to materials. Right? Advertisements, right, have happy people with lots of possessions. Right? And it's a subconscious, right, equation. Happiness equals possessions. Let me buy. Right? All of it calling us to be more consumers and to buy this new thing and that new thing with false promises of that's your happiness. It never wins. It never works. And we know it's true. And they know it's true. But we have the way out. We have the answers. And we have true meaning in life if we embrace it. Right? So the first is to leave the haram 100%. If it's haram, Imam Ghazali says anything that is haram, any natural desire, there's a halal way to fulfill it. There's a halal way to fulfill it. Then after that, we slowly start to dedicate our life, like a marathon, not like a 40-yard dash, right? Slowly but surely, gradually, slowly inculcating discipline and removing things from our lives that are of no meaning, that have no true meaning. And the Prophet said that from the beauty of a person's Islam is them leaving that which has no meaning to them, right? It does not concern them or has no meaning to them. Right? Slowly but surely. Right? And the thing is that while it may be difficult in the beginning, Allah will replace that difficulty with a sweetness that you could never experience, that you've never experienced before. And it will be, right, just like Ali was, right, voluntarily searching for the hottest days of the year to fast. Right? It'll be, right, something that you long for. That Quran, you'll long for the Quran. Right? Somebody will ask you to come sit down and watch a movie with them, and the whole time you're thinking, man, I wish I could just read Quran. Right? Things switch. You'll be amazed at how Allah can switch the heart. But it takes resolve, as we mentioned. Right? Whoever has true resolve and strives for it, they will get it. Allah will give it to them. Right? But Allah doesn't give it to anyone, right, who claims to want it. Right? Otherwise, He would give it. It would be of no value to just give it away. Right? But those who really want to get it. Next week is we're coming very close to the end. There's 2 chapters left, and then the conclusion. May Allah allow us to benefit from Imam Haddad and allow us to practice what he's taught us. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to remove from our hearts the love of worldliness and material things, and to replace it with love of Allah and love of that which Allah loves and love of all the actions that will draw us nearer to Allah's love. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless us with the best of this life and the next. في خير ولطف وعافية, in good and gentleness and well-being. وصلى الله تعالى على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم والحمد لله رب العالمين والعفو منكم. If there's any questions, I think we have a minute or two to take. If there's anything that's not clear, or maybe a personal situation, that how do you apply these things to, the Prophet said, إِنَّمَا الشِّفَاءُ الْعَيِّ سُؤَالٌ. The only cure to confusion is asking. So you check the online. I believe the Mawlid will start at 12:30.